Good evening, folks. Kent Hovind here, and just one of the crew of Dinosaur Adventureland. Two in the room. We're just going to do a quick intro. I did a debate a couple nights ago with the guy who just simply called himself Jerome. He said he has a degree in chemical engineering. Wouldn't give his last name or his location, so I don't know anything about that. We didn't have any visuals. It's going to be a little bit just pictures and audio. Me and audio and sound, okay? Yeah. So anyway, I thought it was interesting you might want to see. I agreed to go with him 1 hour and another hour later in the future if he'd like to do it again and over again. The goal is to get him converted and to get everybody else converted. So I want you to see here the frustration, I guess, that people get when they just simply don't see it. I feel like I'm trying to explain colors to a blind man. They can't see it. They blindly believe in this crazy evolution theory. So instead of a Bible study tonight, July 29th, 2018, will be the debate that I did Saturday night with Jerome at 10 o'clock at night, and I'll be glad to do more. I'd like all of you to help me. Before I went to prison for 9 years unjustly, and that's all on KentHovindIsInnocent.com, I used to do 4 or 5 radio programs a day. I would do a bunch. So if you would all be my PR people and call all the radio stations you can find out in your area, YouTube channels I'd be a guest speaker on. I'd like to make them 15 to 30-minute programs if possible, but I'd like to do many, many every day and defend the position that the Bible is true and the evolution theory is stupid, extremely stupid. Sweetly in Christian love.
And the gap theory. This is about the gap theory, right? Evolution fits into the Bible.
Oh, trying to make evolution fit in the Bible. Yeah, don't even try it. There's no need for that. Anyway, please help me with that. But hope you enjoyed this discussion I had. Maybe a debate to be a little strong, but I'd be glad to do more. Get me into your universities. You students that go to a school that teaches evolution, challenge the teacher. Say, would you have Kent Hovind come speak at our school on creation? And then he'll take any questions we've got. Any questions? At Berkeley, they asked 164 professors. I told them to do this. I said, ask every professor, will you debate Kent Hovind? And they will say no. And they'll give you, I can tell you the reasons they'll use. I can give you a list if you'd like, check which one they're going to use. He's not qualified, no accredited degree, same old story. It doesn't matter. I could be a kindergarten dropout. It wouldn't matter. But they asked 164 professors, would you debate? And they all said no. So I said, then schedule me to come speak and run a full-page ad in the Berkeley paper. I don't know if they did that or not, but you can do this. Run a full-page ad in your student journal or student newspaper. Come here, Kent Hovind, speak on creation. The following professors refuse to debate him. Out here. So please try to schedule radio programs, TV shows, debates at universities. I want to take what God has given me over the years and use it to teach the truth and to challenge the worshipers of Baal who are out there trying to dance around their fire, trying to make life come from rocks. I feel it's just about as dumb. All right, I've got to give a tour of Dinosaur Adventureland, brother, from Gypsum, Colorado. I wrote about that in my story to my grandkids. We traveled around Colorado, an imaginary story. Stopped in Gypsum, where they make the sheetrock. Mine a bunch of it out of there. Whole mountains made out of it. Yeah, beautiful place. We'll give a tour in a second. Hope you enjoy this debate. We'll be back on Bible study and talking about bacteria tomorrow night. Thank you. Hello, folks. My name is Kent Hovind. It is July 27th, 2018. I'm an evangelist. I speak on the topic of creation versus evolution. And I have on the phone here from Maryland, Jerome, who says he believes in evolution and has asked me to debate him. I do not know anything about him other than not even his last name. So, Jerome, you said you wanted to go first and you wanted to explain your position on creation versus evolution, and whatever time you take, as long as I get equal time.
Just so you know, your microphone's a little fuzzy, so I might, every now and then I might ask you to repeat what you said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. But can you hear me just fine, by the way?
I hear you fine. Really good. Yes.
Okay. That's good. All right. So let me know when you want me to start.
Go ahead.
All right. So I don't have much to say. I'm basically here to talk about how you basically had an inconsistent position regarding evolution. Because to me, there's 2 basic positions against evolution. There's what I like to call the hard position, which says that evolution's impossible, that it can happen. And then there's a soft position, which says it's possible, but you haven't proven it enough, so you can't teach it as a fact. Now, in your opening statements in your debates, you always claim the hard position, which is that evolution's impossible. Not only is it impossible, but it's ridiculous. But then when you go on to defend your position, instead of defending the hard position, which is the position that you you started taking, you defend the soft position, which is basically all you say is evolution hasn't been proven, we haven't seen it. You've never really done anything to show that it's impossible. Now, I know a lot of the time you like to talk about how the burden of proof is on the evolutionists because they receive tax dollars to pay their theory, to fund to teach their theory. But right now, that doesn't matter, because no matter what the outcome of this debate, it's not going to change anything in the outside world. I mean, those textbooks are still going to say the same thing. We're not going to change anything here tonight. So the only thing that matters in a debate is what each of us is saying and what each of us is claiming. So if you're going to claim that evolution is impossible, I think the burden of proof is on you to prove that it's impossible. And also, when you compare evolution to creation, you're always saying that creation is the more viable model for how we got here. And again, you do this position while placing the burden of proof on the evolutionists, while using the defense that they collect tax dollars to fund their theory. But again, we're not talking about who gets tax dollars and what gets taught in the schools. Right now, we're just talking about what's going on in the debate and what each person is talking about. So if you're going to claim that creationism is a more viable model, I think you should compare them side by side under the same standards. In other words, you should judge creationism under the same scrutiny that you judge evolution. So that's pretty much all I have to say. So I'm going to end what I have to say with that simple question.
Okay,
Between evolution and creation, which is the more viable model for how we got here and why?
Okay, Jerome, could you define, what do you mean by that word evolution? What does it mean to you?
The evolution is changing of species over time.
Are there any limits? Are there any limits to that?
Define limits. There's limits to, like, I know the other time we called, you said a cow could never evolve to where it could jump over the moon, and I agree with that. But that's not really a genetic limit that's specific to the cow. I think that's true for all animals. And when you say something like it's impossible for the horse to grow wings and fly, that's not specific to the horse. That's true for all animals as heavy as a horse. I think the heaviest animal that can fly, I'm not entirely sure about this, I think it's the condor, and it weighs like 20-something pounds. I think anything that weighs as much as a horse would have a hard time flying. And I'm saying is the limits that I'm talking about are not genetic limits. They're physical limits.
Well, that's what I'm trying to understand. So you're saying that evolution is, if I have it right here, change of species over time.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'd like to be a little more specific. What causes...
So you're trying to distinguish micro from macro evolution?
Well, if you've seen my seminar, you know I give it 6 different definitions or meanings. Or
well, yeah, but so I sent you a text. You said you get 800 calls, so you probably don't remember this, but I said I'm not interested in talking about Big Bang, age of the Earth, or abiogenesis.
Okay.
I'm only going to talk about evolution, and that's all.
Well, so you want to start with things that are already living.
Yes.
And then discuss how they change.
Yeah, let's just say we don't know how living organisms got here. Let's say we have no clue. For all we know, God put the first cell on Earth, and then it evolved on its own. Like, I don't know what happened before that. I'm just going to talk about is starting from first life beyond. That's
okay.
all.
Would you agree that the textbooks and the schools typically do include the rest of the story, which would be the beginning of time, space, matter, i.e. Big Bang, that is taught in...
Well, yeah, but I'm not here to defend that part of it. Like,
okay.
I don't really know much about the Big Bang. I don't really know much about abiogenesis or if it can actually happen. I'm not here to defend that part. I'm just here to start with a story where life started and move forward from there.
So this life that got started, again, I want you to tell exactly what you mean. Was this life that got started like a single cell?
It was a single cell, I believe. That's a theory.
Okay. And are you aware of any examples of two-celled creatures in the world, or three-celled?
No.
Well, how did it get from single cell to multi-cell then?
Eukaryotes. It started with colonies. My understanding, like, I think you debated Bill Ludlow at one point, and I think he explained it to you that multi-celled organisms started when single-celled organisms banded together and formed colonies, kind of like mold or pond scum,
Sure.
things like that, or sponges. And then little by little, they would start to form like whole organisms because if you look at like mold and pond scum, even though they're one big mass, they're still individual living cells. Like you can cut a piece of pond scum and it would survive just fine because the cells are still independent living beings.
Right.
But eventually it'll get to the point where they're not interdependent living beings, where each cell has its own individual function and they're part of a bigger whole. So if you look at, I don't exactly know where it started or if there was an exact point, but if you look at an animal like a jellyfish is a living being, but for the most part, most of its cells are similar. Like they don't really have like a clear distinction from one another, not like us, like we have blood and bones and nerves. Like jellyfish are probably one of the simplest multi-celled organisms.
Okay.
And then from there, it got to where every cell was very distinct, and then there was distinct organs and so on. That's my best understanding of it.
Okay, now I want you to define your position clearly. Is this something changing from single cell to multi-cell,
Yes.
using the colony route to get there? The cells banded together, made colonies like pond scum, and
Yes.
that pond scum then became the equivalent to some kind of tissue like a heart or a kidney or...
Well, no. You're jumping into macroevolution. It happened slowly, and each individual organ evolved slowly over time. It didn't just appear.
It happens? I don't want to misquote you here. Okay. Now, is this something that you know or something that you believe?
No, I'm not saying I know this for sure.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, this is how it could have happened, but if you're going to claim it's impossible, I want to know how exactly it's impossible.
Well, I guess my definition of science would be things that we can observe and study and test. Nobody's ever observed any of this happening.
Okay, yeah. I know we can't necessarily directly observe it.
Sure.
But can we at least teach it as a theory?
Well, that would be in a science class, we should deal with science. It's not something we see or test or observe. So why are we teaching?
Inference. We have to infer certain things. I mean,
Sure.
realistically, we can't observe everything.
Well, that's what I've always said is this belief that this somehow changed from, say, pond scum or something into slowly over I'll give you trillions of years if you want. If it changed into some kind of tissue or an organ, as opposed to a colony of individual cells. Because certainly I would think everybody would agree that your heart is not just a colony of individual cells working independent that can work independently.
But you're thinking that it suddenly jumped.
No.
From being,
you can go slowly. Yeah. You can go as slowly as you want. Your car is a collection of nuts and bolts and various different components. None of which, or let's take an airplane. None of the individual parts of an airplane can fly. None of them.
I agree.
Together, it can fly. So, let's take the individual parts of a bird, since airplanes don't reproduce. The individual parts of the bird, the feather, the beak, the feet, the heart muscle, the kidney, whatever, none of those parts can fly. They work together. They work all together to create a creature which is capable of flying, called a bird. So, yeah, do you believe that these changes that well, I guess my point would be we observe limits to these things, but you think given enough time there would not be any limits. It could actually change. So my question to you is this part of science or should this be in a philosophy class? Since it's
Not false, it could be taught as a theory, because again, there's some evidence suggesting that it could have been true, and there's nothing falsifying it so far. So I don't have a problem with it being taught as a theory. If you say it can't be taught as a fact because we can't observe it, I have no problem with that. But
Okay.
I think it should be at least taught as a theory. And if you think that it shouldn't even be taught as a theory, I think you should prove that.
Okay. Could it also be taught in a theory in the same class that maybe somebody designed it, but we're not allowed to say who we think, you know?
Well, it depends on what you mean by somebody. What do you mean by somebody? You mean like a deity? Or
Well,
an
yeah,
alien,
well,
or what?
you could call it, you could say a deity designed it, or a Martian from outer
Okay, so that
space.
can't be taught in science class. Now, I'm not saying it's not true. Obviously, as a Christian, I believe it is true to some degree. But it can't be taught in a science class, because if God does exist, then he's a metaphysical being, and science only deals with the physical world.
Okay, well, in the physical world, we don't ever observe pond scum developing anything into other than pond scum. So why are we allowed to teach that given time, pond scum can turn to a tissue or an organ?
Well, no. It's not pond scum. It's something similar to pond scum.
Okay, a colony. I'm trying to figure out how you get from a single.
Colony of cells, yeah. A
Okay.
colony of cells
Right.
developing into tissue over time, yeah.
So you think single cells can join together into colonies, and that process over time can
But hold
produce.
on. If you don't mind, I want to go back to your example with the bird.
Sure.
So you're talking about how you're comparing a bird to an airplane, saying how bird flies and airplane flies each has individual parts that help it fly, and each individual part can't fly on its own. It would need all the other parts working together with it, right?
Yeah, well, forget the airplane, unless you have a point you want to make there. Birds are living.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, with the airplane, it was specially designed by people to fly. Now, what you're assuming is that the bird was also specially designed to fly.
Yeah, I
Which
definitely.
is not necessarily the case.
I believe it is, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is it's possible that birds develop the ability to fly by accident over time.
Well, it seems to me like you're attributing what I would call a deity. You're giving time that ability to do that. Time can do something that nobody can observe it in the present. What if we take a creature that has a very short lifespan, such as bacteria, where we could observe thousands of generations in one human lifespan? Do we ever observe bacteria becoming anything other than bacteria?
No, nobody expects it to. Evolution doesn't expect it to. I believe this has been explained to you before.
Well, the fact that somebody stated something to me before, or what you use the word explained, does not mean it's true.
Okay, it's been stated to you by, I think, Aaron Ra and what's the other guy's name? Herman Mays.
Several have, sure, and they don't get it at all.
No, hold on. What they're saying is bacteria will always only produce bacteria. Dogs will always only produce dogs. Humans will always only produce humans. Nothing jumps from one kind to another. A dog never changes to a cat. A squirrel never changes to a whale.
I understand.
It never worked that way.
Well, that's going forward. What about going backwards? Did a dog come from something that was non-dog, going back into... What was...
It came from a mammal.
Okay. And which came from what?
Vertebrate.
Okay. And so if we go back far enough in time, we end up with a single-celled, something like a bacteria, we'll assume.
Yep.
So starting from the bacteria going forward, you have a bacteria turning into a dog.
Well, it's single-celled organism, not necessarily bacteria.
You have a single-celled organism. Going back in time, the dog came from a single-celled organism.
It came from a eukaryote.
Okay. So going back in time, the dog came from a eukaryote.
Yep.
So if we start with the eukaryote, going forward in time, it would end up as a dog.
Yeah, eventually.
Okay. Well then, Aaron Ra and these other guys said, no, dogs always produce dogs and cows always produce cows.
Yeah.
Well, can't I say all of science tells us that single-celled organisms always produce single-celled organisms? Why would it be different going forward or backward? Either way, it doesn't happen. It's not science.
Well, eukaryotes produce eukaryotes.
Yay,
don't they?
They do. You got it. But yet you think eukaryotes produced a dog.
They did.
Now, is this something you know or something you believe?
This is something that I'm looking at as a theory, and for now, I don't see any problem with it. I don't see anything that proves that it's impossible.
Well, again, this goes to this question, is this science or is this philosophy? You know,
it's not philosophy. You could call it a scientific theory. You could say it still needs more proof, but I don't think you can dismiss it altogether because, again, it has enough evidence to be taught as a theory. So if you're going to say that it doesn't have any evidence, you're going to have to prove that.
Well, I know, as I've said many times, and as you mentioned before we got on the air here, I don't have to prove anything. I'm not asking for mine to be taught. You guys are. You guys are all demanding.
That's what I was saying. Like, we're not talking about what's happening in the school system.
Okay.
Nothing that happens in this debate is going to change the school system. We're only talking about what's happening in this debate, and if you're going to claim something, you have to prove it.
Okay.
So, is evolution impossible in your eyes?
Well, again, it depends what you mean by evolution. I think the creatures that we observe...
I'm saying macroevolution. Macroevolution.
Well, all of the creatures we observe in all of humanity, in every corner of the world, produce after their kind, as I've said.
Okay, can you define what kind is?
Well, the Bible gives the word kind 20 different times in the first 7 chapters. They will bring forth after their kind, and bring forth has to do with reproduce, you know, make babies.
So you're saying interfertility is your definition?
That seems to be how it starts. Now that doesn't mean it can't go beyond that. For instance, Chihuahuas and Great Danes might have reached the point where they're both varieties of the same kind of animal called a dog, but for physical reasons.
We'll discuss that later, but I actually have a bigger point to make.
Okay.
So do you agree that in science, there's this principle that in order for something to be proven true, it has to be falsifiable?
Yeah, I don't think.
Agree with that?
I don't think it's necessary to get into that. It doesn't matter. It's science. The word science.
Why doesn't it matter?
Well, the word science means knowledge. What do we know? How do we know things? Well, I think for centuries people.
Because like earlier I asked you, do you think creation is a more viable model than evolution?
Well, I would say if you're only giving 2 options, somebody made, let's say, the dog. Or the dog developed from a single-celled creature over trillions of years, quadrillions, quintillions. The
creation model, which is what you taught, like God created everything 6,000 years ago,
right,
in 6 days, versus evolution, everything came from a single-celled organism. Which is the more viable model?
Which is more logical?
Which is more logical? Either, however you want to phrase it.
I think because all of observation from every farmer on the planet for all of recorded history would tell us nobody has ever seen any plant or animal.
So you're saying creation is the more logical?
Absolutely. The only logical conclusion is there must have been a creator. It is totally illogical to say that dogs and bananas are related from an amoeba.
I'm asking you a direct question. Do you think the creation model is the more viable model compared to the evolution model?
I think the creation model is the only viable model. I think evolution model is stupid.
Then let me go back.
Okay.
Based on the science, I mean.
Sure.
You mean it's the more viable model based on science, not based on belief, just based on science?
Based on science, I think is the only logical conclusion we can come to is there had to be a designer.
Back to my question. Do you agree that in science, in order for something to be proven true, in order for something to be proven right, it has to be falsifiable?
Well,
meaning there has to be a reasonable way to prove it false.
Okay, how would you prove the creation model false?
That's my next question.
So if something...
let me finish. What hypothetical scenario that if it did happen, it would prove the Bible wrong? It would prove, regarding kinds.
Well,
what do you think would happen? If it happened, it would have proven the Bible wrong.
Well, the Bible makes a clear claim that the animals will bring forth after their kind. Okay. And so, is there any evidence of that not happening?
Hold on. I asked you a question.
I'm answering it.
What is a hypothetical scenario that would falsify what the Bible is claiming?
Okay. If any kind of animal gave birth to something of a vastly different kind.
Can you give examples?
Oh, if a horse gave birth to a bird.
Okay, there. If a horse gave birth to a bird. Now, go back to the definition of kind. it's bringing forth, right?
Right.
So if a horse gave birth to a bird, that would make them the same kind, wouldn't it?
Well, I think all of our...
I know a horse doesn't give birth to a bird. This is a hypothetical scenario.
Okay.
If a horse gave birth to a bird, that would make them the same kind, wouldn't it?
Oh, so this is a lose-lose situation here.
How is it a lose-lose?
Well, you're changing the definitions here. I'm still wanting...
How am I changing the definitions?
Well, I'm still wanting...
This is your definition.
Jerome, I'm still wanting
Yeah.
to figure out, since I'm having to pay for your religion to be taught in schools...
Oh, again, leave that out of this because we are not talking about...
Okay, we're not talking about schools.
What's being done.
Okay.
We're talking about if neither one was being taught in public schools, if there were just two different theories...
Sure.
Being compared side by side, which model would be better? That's what I'm trying to do now. So I'm starting with the definition of kinds, and I'm asking you, like, okay, something has to be falsifiable for it to be proven right. So I asked you, what hypothetical scenario would have happened? If it did happen, it would have proven the Bible wrong regarding kinds. And you said if a horse gave birth to a bird. If a horse gave birth to a bird, according to the Bible's definition, that would make them the same kind, right? Because the only definition is bring forth. So if it brings forth a bird, then they're the same kind, wouldn't it?
So then, if I say it is not falsifiable...
Then it can't be proven right.
This is completely illogical, Jerome. I don't know who taught you that.
Why is it illogical?
Go get your money back from your education, whoever taught you that.
Wait, hold on a second. I'm trying to make a point.
I'd love to know what the point is, too.
Okay, so hold on a second.
Okay.
So creationism teaches about kinds, right?
Right.
And then evolution teaches about species.
Okay.
Right? Now, the definition of a species, from my understanding, is they have to produce fertile offspring. So, for example, a lion and a tiger can produce a liger, but my understanding is a liger is not fertile, so lion and the tiger considered separate species. All right?
Okay.
So you're aware that speciation happens, right? That a population of animals or plants can go from being one single species to speciating into different groups that are no longer interfertile with one another.
Can you give me an example of where that's ever happened? Because I'm unaware of any. I'm unaware of any places where any species has turned into a different species.
No. I didn't say turn into different species. I said produce subspecies, subgroups that are not interfertile with each other anymore. And some of them aren't. Maybe some of them still are, but some of them aren't interfertile with each other anymore.
Okay, I think every 5-year-old would think a lion and a tiger are the same kind of animal called a cat.
Okay. Speaking of 5-year-old, do you think that if you showed 50 different 5-year-olds a picture of a dolphin and then asked them if it's a fish, do you think every single one of them would say no?
I think probably most of them would say it's in the fish category because it swims in the water.
So then you can't really ask a 5-year-old, can you?
Sure I can, because in the biblical classification of things, if it swims in the water, it's in the fish kind.
Okay, but a dolphin is not a fish, though. It's a mammal.
By our modern classification system, who made that decision?
Science.
Science
proves that it's not a fish.
Science proves
Fish have
it.
gills, they have scales.
Believe me, I understand. Sharks also don't have scales, and
So you're saying a dolphin and a fish are the same kind? Is that what you're going with?
I'm pointing out that whoever's making the call on how we're going to classify things, just because Carolus Linnaeus decided to classify creatures that breathe air and give live birth and give milk, i.e. the whale, the dolphin, they are in the mammal category. That's a man-made distinction.
The 5-year-old, you're saying 5-year-olds should classify it?
I think anybody with one eye and half a brain would say animals bring forth after their kind. And a cat, like you mentioned, the tiger and the lion.
So you're saying if somebody like a 5-year-old or any ordinary person that hasn't studied science can look at two animals, and if they say they're the same kind of animal, then they should be the same kind of animal?
I think, I'm not sure who gets to make that decision. Is it you? Do we all have to vote on you to make this decision? But I think that in 99.95% of the cases, it's obvious what's the same kind. There may be some tough ones that science ought to work on. I'm in favor of that. But I think most of the problem is very simple. The animals and plants always bring forth after their kind, and yet you believe that whales and pine trees have a common ancestor.
You haven't clearly defined what a kind is.
Well, I said the Bible says if they bring forth, they're the same kind.
Yeah, so if a horse gives birth to a bird, then they're the same kind.
Okay, so
what I'm saying is that the Bible's definition is not falsifiable, so therefore it can't be proven true. You need a better definition that has more exact criteria so that it's actually falsifiable.
Okay, hold it. Does the fact that it can't be proven true, does that therefore prove it is not true?
Of course not.
Okay.
Even though that's how you judge evolution, but that's a different story. What I'm saying is right now we're comparing creationism to evolutionism side by side with the same criteria. Now, right now I'm talking about falsifiability, so I'm going to compare the two models, what they're saying about species or kind, and how it's falsifiable in each case.
Well, tell me how you would falsify.
Right now, you haven't been able to prove how.
Right.
What the Bible said about animals bringing forth after their kind, how that's even remotely falsifiable.
Okay. Now, how is the evolution theory falsifiable?
Hello?
Yes.
You still there?
Oh, I'm sorry. Mute button got bumped.
Okay.
How is the evolution theory falsifiable?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that. Okay, so there's species, right?
Right.
The definition of species is it's a population, they're all interfertile, and their offspring are all fertile, right? Now, speciation happens when a single population, a single species, speciates into different groups, some of which are not interfertile with each other anymore. Falsifiable, what I think about that would be falsifiable is if that never happened. If every animal gave birth to other animals that are still fertile with each other, and they never separated, and they were always interfertile, and that never changed. That's what would have falsified that. And obviously, they have speciated. So, at the very least, it doesn't necessarily prove that evolution is definitely true, but it proves that evolution could be true.
Well,
so you see, if you compare them side by side, the evolution theory is falsifiable. The creation theory is not.
Well, I don't think you've yet clearly defined what you mean by evolution, which goes back to the first thing we started with a half hour ago. Are there any limits to? Let's start with your bacteria that develops a colony, or a single-celled organism develops a colony.
Right. Yeah.
And can it ever become anything other than a colony? And where's the evidence for that?
Can it become anything? It hasn't.
Well, then evolution is dead in the water right there, because you have to somehow.
Why is it dead in the water?
We have to somehow make a colony of cooperative cells.
Yep. We still are. You still are. I still am. Our bodies are a cooperative colony of cells. It's just they're not independently living anymore. Now they're all dependent on one. Well, most of them are. I mean, you can lose a finger and still survive, but some of them are vital, like the brain and the heart.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned
lose them, you die. Yeah.
You mentioned you could cut off a piece of pond scum and it would just keep on living and grow a new piece of pond scum.
Right.
Can you cut off your finger and grow a new human?
No, you can't do that.
So
like I said, it reaches the point where we're no longer independently living.
Okay, and this is science, or this is part of a religious belief?
Like I said, it's a scientific theory.
Okay.
You can call it a theory if you want. I have no problem with that. But if you're going to say that it can't be taught as a theory, that it's totally impossible, then you have to prove that.
Okay, so your single-celled organisms, let's take bacteria as an example, are going to they're going to colonize and develop they're all going to cooperate as a colony and work together. And what are the steps, observable scientific steps?
And I can't tell you every single step. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. All I'm telling you is a breakdown, like the overall idea of it.
Right. That's what
I'm saying is, like, if you're going to say that it's impossible, like what aspect of it is impossible? You still haven't given that, though. All you've said is that we haven't observed it, which doesn't make it impossible.
I don't know that I have to prove it's impossible. Is it impossible for a pig to fly?
You claim that it's impossible, so now you have to prove it.
Well, Science deals with things we observe, study, and test. All we've ever observed is bacteria get together and colonize, and that's where it stops. There are no observations of it going beyond that. You believe it goes beyond that.
As a theory.
It's not even a good...
You can extrapolate and make a theory that it can go beyond that and form everything else.
A theory has to have some supporting evidence. What you actually mean is...
It does.
There's no supporting evidence to show a colony of amoeba.
For example, there's a theory that a whale came from a hoofed mammal a couple million years ago, and then they actually found transition fossils going from a hoofed mammal to the whale. I know you're going to say, like, all you know is a fossil died, you don't know it had any children, I already know everything you're going to say, but it at least suggests that could have happened, and I think that should at least be taken into consideration.
Well, you can take anything you want into consideration, but in my way of thinking, a science class should teach things that is science, things we can observe, study, and test.
We're not talking about what's being taught in the science class. What we're talking about is evolution possible, yes or no?
I say no.
Okay, so...
It is not possible for any animal to ever, with any amount of time, I'll give you all the trillions of years you want, it is not possible, it is not possible for any animal to turn into something radically different that anybody would observe, and it's not possible for a bacteria to turn into an elephant. It is not possible. It is impossible. It is flat stupid to believe such a thing.
Okay, so you said it's not possible no matter how much time.
No matter how much time.
My question is, how do you know that if we didn't have that much time? Like, humans have only been observing the world for a couple thousand years.
Right.
If these bigger changes take millions, how could you say they're impossible when the limiting factor is time and we haven't had enough of it?
Well, then you're back to your religious belief. You believe it happened over time, but you don't. That's not science. Why can't you just admit this is your religion?
It's a theory.
It's a religion.
Okay, like going back to religion.
Sure.
What is the definition of religion, and why do you classify evolution under that category?
Well, it's something people believe in, but as opposed to science, you can believe whatever you want. I don't care what you believe.
Believe in something, it doesn't necessarily make it a religion.
Well, I guess Google the probably 500 different people have different ideas of the definition of religion. My point would be it's not something we ever observe, study, or test. If you want to believe elephant...
Okay, but it's not a religion, though.
Well, I believe it is, but you think elephants came from a single-celled bacteria-like creature quadrillions of years ago. Slowly. It happened slowly.
Couple million, couple billion, I don't know the exact number, but yes.
Right. But you believe that?
Yes, and you say it's impossible.
Yeah, I believe it's not only impossible, I think it's silly to believe such a thing.
Okay, how is it impossible, though?
It's not, it doesn't ever happen. It's not scientific.
It doesn't happen in the amount of time that we've been observing it. Doesn't mean it can't happen.
Okay, well, you believe whatever you want. Jerome, I don't care what you believe. But you want to call this science, and it's not science to think a whale can come from...
Can you at least call it a scientific theory?
No, it's not even. A theory has to have... What does
something have to qualify as a theory then?
Well, how about let's take the hypothesis, or the theory. Can a cow ever get enough muscle to jump over the moon?
You asked me that question before.
I know. I'm trying to get you to understand.
I'm pretty sure the answer is no. I mean, I'm not a physicist or a biologist, but I'm sure if the best physicists and biologists in the world got together, they could write out a formula that shows that it's impossible for a cow to get enough muscle in its legs based on the gravitational pull of the earth and based on the weight of the cow. Yeah, that it's impossible.
So it is possible for cows to jump, but not very high typically, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So it is possible that they jump, but there's a limit to how high they can jump.
Yes, but that's a physical limit. It's not a genetic limit that's specific to the cow. So when you say that a hoofed animal can't change into a whale, you're saying that hoofed animal had a genetic limit preventing it from becoming anything close to a whale. And I'm just wondering why.
Well, I would go back to all we have for science is observation, testing, demonstration. Go ahead and show me.
Okay.
How are you going to turn your hoofed animal into a whale?
Huh?
Would you agree?
Did you describe it over time?
Well,
in the individual microevolutions?
Do you understand how whales breathe?
Through a blowhole.
Do you understand that that blowhole goes to their lungs? It does not go through their esophagus.
Okay, I don't see where you're going with this.
Okay. They eat through their mouth, which goes straight to their stomach. It is totally unconnected, different tube than the lungs getting the air through the blowhole. You, however, and I both eat and breathe through the same orifice called mouth. And then you have to have a special flap, a valve called the epiglottis, to change it if it's going to go to the stomach or the
you're saying
lungs.
its body is arranged in a different way, so that it couldn't have come from a hoofed animal that lived on land.
How could this hoofed animal on land, which has one orifice like a mouth going to two different things with an epiglottis, how's he going to develop a blowhole that is a completely separate new tube? How's it going to live in the meantime? And where is the evidence?
Slowly over time.
And where's the evidence for this?
They have fossil records.
How can this physically work? I don't understand how the cow.
To tell you the truth, I don't know how every single macroevolution happened, but just because I don't understand it, it doesn't mean it never happened. I mean, I don't understand how a camera works either. That doesn't mean it doesn't work.
Okay. Well, that's, I guess, my whole point, Jerome. What you have is a very sincerely held, strongly held belief that it can happen, in spite of the fact you have no provable evidence. Nobody's going to ever...
Other than the intermediate fossils?
Well, as I point out clearly, nobody's ever refuted. You can't prove those fossils had any children. You certainly can't
we'll
prove...
just call it a theory for now.
Okay, well then we're back to the main point. Where's the evidence?
So do you agree evolution can be taught as a theory?
No, there's way less than a theory. It's called a hypothesis. I could get a hypothesis that a cow could jump over the moon. So then I get in order to become qualified as a scientific...
There's nothing suggesting that a cow can jump over the moon, though.
Well, that's my theory. My theory is if we give that cow a bunch of vitamins, he'll be able to jump over the moon. So
There is nothing supporting that. There is nothing at all supporting that.
So therefore, it's going to simply stay a hypothesis. In order to be a theory...
Okay, but evolution has the fossil record. They've made predictions. They predicted that a whale came from a land-dwelling mammal, and they predicted there would be transition fossils, and there were.
No, there weren't. There weren't.
What makes a theory?
Jerome, there weren't.
What?
There weren't transition fossils. There were fossils. They're not transition. You don't know that that's transition to anything. Stop saying it's a transition fossil.
But they're connected, though. There's similarities between intermediate fossils. I'm calling them intermediate, between the hoofed animal and the whale.
Sure, and there's no doubt in my mind.
And that's kind of what helps a theory be viable, is predictability. If they're able to make a novel prediction, that suggests that their theory could be true. And I think evolution has demonstrated this more than a few times.
No, no fossils can count, Jerome. You can.
Why?
How could you possibly prove the bones you found in the dirt had any children, let alone children that are different from themselves?
Why did the individual bones have to have children themselves? I mean, do you at least agree that whatever you found in the dirt belonged to a population?
Well, you're going back to the definition of what is actually evidence. You want to use these fossils as evidence, and I'm telling you, in any court of law, a freshman law student could point out. Well,
I know what you're going to say.
Then refute it.
What I'm saying is, when you see a row of fossils starting from a hoofed animal to a whale, you see similarities between them. It appears that they might be changing. You can say that it's not a fact because it hasn't been proven, but you have to at least admit it's a theory.
No, a theory has to have some supporting evidence. It's a hypothesis. It's a religious belief. You believe...
Okay, here we go again. Religion. What is your definition of religion?
You're not getting it, Jerome. You found fossils in the dirt. Somebody arranged them in order that they thought it might have happened in. I would say none of them count. You don't know they had any children, and
why don't they count?
We never see any hoofed animal produce anything other than a hoofed animal. That's all we can observe.
Yeah, because it takes longer.
There you're back to your magical, if I said, Mary Poppins flew rapidly through the air, you'd say that's a fairy tale. That's not. I agree. But
What would be the science behind it?
What if she flew slowly through the air with her umbrella?
Sorry, I lost you there. Would you say it one more time?
Well, if Mary Poppins flew quickly through the air with her umbrella, you would say that's...
I would say, how does the umbrella work? See, assuming this whole Mary Poppins thing is an actual theory that we're taking seriously, you would have to be specific about how it works.
Okay.
How does an umbrella fly? How come my umbrella can't fly?
Well, let me take one that's like straight from the textbook, since I taught these topics for you.
Okay.
The textbooks have pictures showing that a frog slowly turned into a human. If I told you if you kiss a frog, it will turn to a human, we would all agree, I would hope you would agree, that that is a fairy tale. It doesn't happen, okay? But you think if we give the frog millions or billions of years, it can turn into a human. I can show you from textbooks that you probably went to school and learned from, since you have a BS in...
They say the frog turned into a human, or they say the frog and a human share a common ancestor?
Well, a frog-like ancestor turned into a human.
Sorry, I lost you again. Can you repeat that?
A frog-like ancestor, some type of reptile, fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal is the series they teach, FARM, F-A-R-M. So, yes, they do teach that reptiles turned into humans. So, that one particular frog did not turn to a human, but the frog kind turned into the human kind slowly. But yet you would agree if the frog turned into the human kind quickly with a kiss or something, that's a fairy tale. But somehow adding time seems to solve everything in your mind. I'm baffled that you can believe such a thing.
Well, it doesn't solve everything. It doesn't make a cow jump over the moon. I think I've explained that. It doesn't make a horse fly. Like I said, there are limits. There are physical limits.
There are
no limits that are specific to just one animal, that are just genetic.
Okay. There are genetic limits, but there are quite a few limits. Would you agree that, let's see, bacteria produce more bacteria?
Yes.
Okay. Are there limits? Can we ever get a bacteria as big as a house, or are they limited?
That's a physical limit.
Okay. Can you ever get a bacteria as big as a whale?
No.
But there are animals as big as a whale, you know, like a whale.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's your point?
So somehow the bacteria had to turn into a whale, or over billions or trillions or quadrillions or vigintillion years.
All right. So yeah, I'm losing you again. I didn't hear that last sentence.
You believe you believe something like a bacteria, a single-celled creature, turned into a whale.
They banded together to form colonies.
And turned into a whale, eventually.
Yeah.
And you want this to be taught as science.
I think it at least qualifies as a theory. Unless you can prove that it's impossible, which you haven't done yet.
All right. Well, we're going around in circles here. We agreed to go for 1 hour. It's been...
Let's bring it in a slightly different direction. Okay, so you keep saying evolution hasn't been proven. Fossils don't prove anything. We don't see it happening.
Right.
Okay, so speaking of which, now let's go back to the creation theory. What do we observe that even says that creationism is true?
Well, okay, good. Okay. Here we have a book, the Bible, telling us that God made all the animals and plants to bring forth after their kind. That's what the book says. All human observation says, wow, cows produce cows, cats produce cats, pine trees produce pine trees. We get a lot of varieties within that kind. There are now 339 recognized breeds of dogs, and I don't know how many kinds of wolves, and they're quite obviously the same kind of animal. As I mentioned, a 5-year-old could tell you that. And
going back to that, so a wolf and a pug are the same kind of animal, right?
A wolf and a dog appear to be the same kind of animal. I would say yes.
A wolf and a pug. Let's be specific. A wolf and a pug, same kind of animal.
A pug, okay.
Okay,
yes.
Do you think a person who has never seen a wolf or a pug, or has never heard of either of the two, could look at the two of them and say, yeah, that's the same kind of animal?
Well, that's what science ought to be doing. They ought to be examining things and say, okay, let's look at the body.
No, you're using the whole observational thing. You're saying anybody looking at it, I believe what you said, one eye and half a brain.
Sure.
Looking at it could say they're the same kind of animal. So do you think a person who's never heard of a dog before could look at a pug and look at a wolf and say, yeah, that's the same kind of animal?
Well, do you think a butterfly and a caterpillar is the same kind?
No.
Are they the same kind of
I'm
animal?
talking about the wolf and the pug right now.
Sure. I think most people would recognize, wow, this is probably the similar kind, a wolf and a dog, whether it be a pug or a chihuahua. They would say they have lots of similarities. And yes, they could have
Some
easily.
similarities, yeah, but a lot of other animals have similarities. Like, have you ever heard of the Tasmanian tiger?
I have, probably extinct.
Yeah, it's extinct.
Well, we don't know
If you
that.
look at it, it looks a lot like a dog, but it's not. It's a marsupial.
Yeah, somebody decided to classify
Yeah,
it
so
differently because it has a
person would
pouch.
look at that and a dog and say they're the same kind of animal.
Well, I don't know if the Tasmanian wolf is a different kind in God's classification, just because some modern person.
Well, you said bring forth after their kind, though, so
well, I
they would
don't.
have to bring forth with each other to be the same kind, I would think.
Well, probably
So-
probably all the marsupial animals, the pouched mammals, were a different created kind than the placental
So you're saying
placental
Tasmanian
mammals.
tiger is different from a dog.
Probably two different kinds of dogs. Yes, pouched
Okay,
and
would
non-pouched.
you agree that somebody looking at them who doesn't know anything about animals, doesn't know anything about taxonomy, just looks at the Tasmanian tiger and the wolf and thinks they're probably the same kind of animal?
Well, they would be mistaken in that case. Now,
Okay, so then if you can't use that as a way of determining it, then what can you use?
oh, that's just one of many things. Observation is one of many things you use in science. There are lots of different tools scientists use besides observation.
Okay. Well, name one.
Well, do you believe a butterfly and a caterpillar are the same kind of animal?
Well, obviously I know that because I've been taught that and I've seen it. So
Okay.
yeah.
What if you had never seen it? You bring somebody from Mars down.
I probably wouldn't know. Yeah.
Okay. So they would need to be educated to say, no, this is the same kind of animal, just a different stage in its life.
Right.
Okay. So I think somebody might need to be educated to say, well, it's probably not possible for a placental dog to turn into a dog with a pouch,
tiger.
like a Tasmanian tiger. So there probably are two different created kinds of very similar looking creatures that we would probably.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, you started out saying anyone can tell a dog is a dog, or dogs are all the same kind of animal, cats are all the same kind of animal, but we've just proven that observation isn't always accurate, though. So if you can't use observation, then what else can you use?
Well, as I've said several times, Jerome, observation is one of many tools that scientists use. All we've ever observed, though, is cows produce cows and dogs produce dogs. What evidence would you offer that this can be different, other than claiming time can do it magically? Forget time.
Okay, do lions produce tigers, or do tigers produce lions?
Neither one. They can crossbreed, though.
Okay, so yeah, they can crossbreed, but they don't give birth to each other, though. Like if two lions had a baby, it would never come out as a tiger, would it?
Correct. Yeah, correct. Lions produce lions.
So does that mean that they're a different kind of animal?
Probably, but the fact that they can interbreed and produce a generally non-fertile offspring.
So they're probably a different kind of animal? That's what you're going with?
Well, this is we're straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel, Jerome. They're both in the cat family. They're both the cat kind. The fact
Because what I'm getting at is, like, you're kind of running around in circles when I'm trying to ask you to define what a kind is.
Uh-huh.
So can you define one or not?
Well, I can't in all cases. Like I've said, I think 99.5% of the cases it's pretty obvious. A dog and a wolf are the same kind.
99.5% of the cases, I would have to disagree with you on that.
Okay. Well, you can believe whatever you want. But what we observe is dogs and wolves probably interfertile. I think we could use the observation, just simply the physical structure. We could also then examine the DNA, and we'd open up a whole new world, and then we probably would prove that, wow.
To the DNA, like, how different does DNA have to be that they would be considered a different kind of animal?
Well, I don't know where that line is, and again, I'm not asking for mine to be taught, but...
Okay, again, we're not talking about what's being taught in the schools. We're just talking about what's going on in this debate.
Okay.
And what each of us are saying.
Right.
So, can you define a kind or not? Do you know exactly where the line is?
I don't know. I don't know where the line... You can't define species either.
I have defined species.
Okay.
I told you what the definition is.
Is a dog and a wolf a different species?
Which dog?
Any dog. Is a Great Dane and a wolf a different species?
I don't know for sure, but I believe they're different species, because, again, the definition of species is they have to be able to produce sterile offspring.
Can a
I
dog?
don't know if a Great Dane and a wolf can produce sterile offspring. I'm sorry.
I think they can
When I say
produce
sterile, I meant fertile offspring.
fertile. Yeah.
So I don't know if a Great Dane and a wolf can produce fertile offspring.
It is my understanding that wolves and dogs can produce fertile offspring. I think that's
Okay. I
so.
have to take your word on that.
Okay, but would that then be the same species? Why do you have two?
I guess it would then.
Well, but a dog and a wolf are classified as different species. Canis lupus, Canis coyotes, Canis domesticus.
People have different definitions of what a species is.
Yay, you finally getting it,
but
Jerome.
here's the difference, though. At least there are definitions. There is no definition of a kind, though.
I gave
There's
you
not
one.
one single definition.
I did. If
What is the definition? I don't want to hear an example. I want to hear a definition.
if they bring forth, they're the same
If they bring
kind.
forth. Okay, so a lion and a cheetah are not the same kind?
No, lions and cheetahs have been crossbred. They can bring forth.
I'm pretty sure they can't.
I've got a chart showing all the different
Okay,
big
but what
cats.
about a lion and a lynx?
There may be physical barriers there because the lion's so much larger than the lynx, like a Chihuahua mating with a Great Dane. But
Okay, what if you impregnate a lion with a lynx?
I think probably
Sure.
there's a chart. I could call. My computer just died, but there's a chart showing all the major big cats have been crossbred. They get
But a cheetah is. I don't think a cheetah is classified as a big cat. I think a cheetah is sort of. It's not quite a big cat, but it's not quite a small cat. I think it's sort of somewhere in between, which. I think it's interfertile with a leopard, but not a lion, though.
I don't know.
I mean, I Googled it. I Googled, is a cheetah interfertile with a lion? It said no.
Okay. All right. We've got an hour. Let me ask you a different question here, Jerome. And I'll be glad to do this. I'll be glad to do this again, by the way, as often as you'd like. Now, is there a reason?
Yeah.
Is there some reason why you want to believe this evolution theory?
I don't want to believe it.
Okay.
It seems to be where all the evidence is pointing.
Okay. Well,
I'm just asking you to prove that it's
Right.
impossible, if indeed you are saying it's impossible.
Well, let me bring this down where the rubber meets the road. God's word, the Bible, which claims to be the word of God, says very clearly that God made everything in 6 days. Do you believe that to be true, or was God lying, or is?
I don't believe it's literal.
So when he said in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, how would you interpret that? That's what it says.
Ask you, Ross.
I did.
I'm not an expert in that field.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay, would you
I'm a
agree?
Christian, but I have to confess I'm not very knowledgeable about the Bible.
Okay. Well, look at Matthew chapter 19, verse 4, and Mark 10:6. Those two verses, you put them together, it's pretty clear. Jesus said the creation of Adam was the beginning of the creation. That's where it started. Was Jesus lying?
Are you trying to give me a Bible lesson because...
No. I'm trying to point out that you are calling Jesus a liar. You are calling God.
You're going this route now, so you can't do it scientifically. So now you're
you're
turning me into a bad Christian. Is that it?
I don't know if you're a Christian or not. I would doubt that, but that's up to you.
I guarantee you, I'm a Christian.
Okay.
I'm Catholic, and I know you don't like us. You don't like our denomination, but
There's nothing to do with it. I just go by the teaching. It's not the person at all. It's what do they teach.
Are we going to go back to the science, or are you going to call me a bad? You're going to make me a bad Christian?
I'm simply pointing out that the Bible clearly, Jesus said, according to Matthew 19:4 and Mark 10:6, that he said the creation of Adam was the beginning, and the Bible clearly teaches nothing died until man sinned.
Allegorical. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that field.
Okay. Do you believe anything died? Was there death before Adam sinned?
I don't believe Adam was a literal person.
Okay. Well, Jesus thought he was. So was Jesus lying? Was he stupid? Did he need you to interpret it?
You'll have to tell me where that verse is, because
Matthew 19:4, Matthew 19:4, and Mark 10:6. I told you.
Matthew 19:4. Let me look that up.
And Mark 10:6.
Although I don't know why we're talking about this, because I was here to discuss the science. If you want to call me a bad Christian, you can go ahead and do that.
No,
I think to discuss the science and
my position
creation and evolution.
Right. My position is very consistent. I think God created everything in 6 days. He created probably, let's just pick a number and say 8,000 different kinds of animals on land. I don't know how many kinds in the water, probably more than that. But let's say he created 8,000 kinds of land animals. He gave them the ability in their genetic code, which is mind-bogglingly complex. He gave each kind of animal the ability to produce a variety of offspring. So some can survive in dry climate or wet climate or cold climate or warm climate, but they're still recognizable as the same kind of animal.
Okay, but again, you're not really defining what a kind is. So
Well,
it's not what you're saying. What I'm saying is, the Bible's your theory about creationism is not falsifiable, so therefore it can't really be proven true. So if you make a side-by-side comparison,
so therefore it's not true.
Evolution, it's pretty clear which the better model is.
Well, in your mind, I think it is pretty clear, and I wish we could clear that up for you, because it's an extremely.
I wish you could too, but it's been an hour and you still haven't. So I don't know what to say.
Well, I may be willingly ignorant, like 2 Peter 3 would be the best way to say it.
You may be. I don't know.
Okay. Well, my position would be God made all the different kinds of animals in 6 days. He gave them amazing DNA code, ability to reproduce a variety, but the varieties are limited. You may get
You know how many of each he took onto the ark?
I would guess about 8,000 kinds of animals would be a reasonable guess.
Wait, how many? I missed that.
About 8,000 pairs of animals onto the ark.
8,000 pairs, so a total of 16,000.
Right, and Noah being
Does that
600.
include insects?
No, insects, the Bible clearly says in the flood story. I'll tell you what, it's been an hour. Let's do the flood story next time. I will defend the Bible teaching of the flood story as being the only logical way to explain the fossils that we find, to explain the minerals in the ground like coal, oil, natural gas, to explain Grand Canyon.
Okay, but we really haven't finished this discussion.
I know, but we agreed to go an hour. If you want to go, tell you what, call me back tomorrow. I have to work for a living, and so.
Well, I do too, but.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can. Maybe sometime during the day next time.
You call sometime. We'll schedule another one, and let's narrow it down a little bit. You think that bacteria forming a colony is
not bacteria, single-celled organism.
Okay. You think single-celled organisms colonizing is sufficient to explain how we get
Not that alone. Not that alone. There's a lot of other stuff too.
Okay. Bring up the other things next time. What else would it take to turn a bacteria?
There's a fossil record that links different animals together.
Well, I pointed out there.
And there's also different ring species, I believe. I haven't really looked into that, but.
Yeah, there is no fossil record.
But do you believe that ring species that they exist?
Well, let's do that next time. I got to go to bed. Okay. Well, Jerome.
Is this really going to be posted on YouTube? How soon can I find it on there?
Oh, I know, that's up to Nick. He does editing, and he's probably already in bed, so forget it. Probably in the next day or two. Go to Kent Hovind Official, and we'll post it up there. Okay?
All right.
Well, thank you.
All right, I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jerome. All right, bye-bye.
All right, thank you. Bye.